What do you do if during the most harrowing night of your entire life, you find that you can't even trust your closest people? I'm Dre, and this is The Midnight Hour. Tonight, we will be looking at Resident Evil, The Umbrella Conspiracy, written by S.D. Perry, published in 1998, and it is the official novelization of the first Resident Evil game. Now, before we really take off on this video, I should prelude it by saying that Resident Evil has such deep lore and so much going on and such a deep backstory that we're really gonna only focus on this book right now, only this story and only these characters. And why I think that's important is because if you're new to the series or if you've been a long-time veteran, you pretty much will know that any video covering the entire backstory would probably be a few hours long, and we only have a few minutes, so why not just cover what we can here. So this story starts in an average Midwestern American town called Raccoon City, where there has been a recent string of murders happening around the forested areas, around the woods there. Now the stars get called into the situation, which are a special unit of the local police force that specialize in deeper type of operations and riskier things like this. So this group is comprised of a bunch of people who are really close, really tight-knit. Amongst them are a person named Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and Albert Wesker. And those are the three people we're going to focus on most during this video. Now, there are other main characters, of course. The story revolves around other side characters as well. But it is these three people that we're mostly going to look at. And why I've chosen them is because they have a very specific storyline within the broader narrative. And one that deals with trust. One that deals with survival and paranoia when everything else around you is going completely wrong. So basically the story is set up as the STARS unit going into the forest, trying to find out what is causing all these murders. They stumble upon this mansion. Upon entering the mansion, they find that it is pretty much a labyrinth, a modern day labyrinth of locked doors, hidden hallways, and just terrifying tunnels and what have you. So amongst this array of intrigue, there are also dangers lurking around in this house, in this mansion. Anything and everything goes, from zombies to zombie dogs to zombie crows. And they have to basically fend for themselves, find all the keys, and just get to safety by sunup, because if not, they're going to go the way of all of those runners and hikers and people who have fallen victim to these monstrosities. Now, it is revealed that the mansion is owned by a pharmaceutical company called Umbrella, which pretty much runs the town and supplies it with all of its economic sources. Most people in the town work for Umbrella, and it is Umbrella that provides everything and anything to the townspeople. Upon further investigation into this mansion, it is also revealed that it is not just a house, but a house built upon secret labs, which has been used for biological research and development on living people themselves. So at this point in the story, everything has pretty much gone to hell, and Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and Albert Wesker, who is the captain of the STARS unit, just find themselves up to their eyeballs in problems, whether it be locked rooms with the ceiling caving in, or venomous snake monsters, or what have you. Now, surrounding all of this is the point of our video tonight, and that is Albert Wesker not only blackmailing the best officer on the STARS unit, Barry Burton, into helping him, but also revealing that Albert Wesker has been working for Umbrella Corporation the entire time, and that he has lured his teammates into this mansion to wipe out all evidence of the disastrous research and experiments happening in the labs below the mansion. And our first excerpt is the moment that Albert Wesker and Barry Burton confront each other about just this very thing, and we're going to read it right now. Quote, Wesker reached up and lowered his shades, breaking their eye contact, and Barry suddenly felt a little nervous. Wesker's grin, if anything, seemed to grow wider. It looked like every tooth was showing. Barry, I need your help. Have you ever heard of White Umbrella? Barry shook his head, feeling more uncomfortable by the second. White Umbrella is a sector of Umbrella Incorporated, a very important division. They specialize in biological research, I guess you could say. The Spencer estate houses their research facilities, and recently an accident occurred. Wesker brushed off a section of the kitchen's center island and casually leaned against it, his tone almost conversational. This division of Umbrella has a few ties to the STARS organization, and not long ago, I was asked to assist in their handling of this situation. It's a very delicate situation, mind you, very hush-hush. White Umbrella doesn't want a whisper of their involvement getting out. Now, what I'm supposed to do is get to the laboratories on the grounds here and put an end to some rather incriminating evidence. Proof that White Umbrella is responsible for the accident that's caused so much trouble in Raccoon as of late. The problem is, I don't have the key to get to those labs. Keys, actually. And that's where you come in. I need for you to help me find those keys. Barry stared at him for a moment, speechless, his mind churning. An accident, a secret lab doing biological research, and murdering dogs and zombies loose in the woods. He raised his revolver and pointed it at Wesker's smiling face, stunned and angry. Are you insane? You think I'm going to help you destroy evidence? Wesker shook his head slowly, acting as if Barry were a child. Ah, Barry, you don't understand. You don't have a choice in the matter. See, a few of my friends from White Umbrella are currently standing outside of your house, watching your wife and daughters sleep. If you don't help me, your family is going to die. Barry could actually feel the blood drain from his face. He cocked the hammer back on the Colt, feeling a sudden, vicious hatred for Wesker infusing every fiber of his being. Before you pull the trigger, I should mention that if I don't report back to my friends fairly soon, their orders are to go ahead and do the deed anyway. The words cut through the red haze that had flooded Barry's mind, turning his hands clammy with terror. Kathy, the babies. You're bluffing, he whispered. And Wesker's grin finally disappeared, his expression slipping back into the unreadable mask that he usually wore. I'm not, he said coldly. Try me. You can apologize to their headstones later. For a moment, neither of them moved, the silence a palpable thing in the chill air. Then, Barry slowly eased the hammer back down and lowered the weapon. His shoulders slumped. He wouldn't risk it. His family was everything. What could you possibly do in a situation like that? When you are faced with some of the most horrendous things you've ever been faced with, and something even worse comes on top of it and is just a little cherry on top, and it especially involves your most loved ones, it's almost like you buckle under that pressure. You break. Now, I should mention that while Wesker and Barry are having this chit-chat, Jill is off in this mansion by herself and just finding out the very hard way how many traps it really has waiting for the Stars team. Upon escaping one of those very traps, she and Barry come face to face. Now, Barry has already been blackmailed to do a certain amount of things for Wesker, but he can't openly say anything to Jill. And even though they're some of the best of friends on that Stars team, Jill and Barry just have this wedge placed between them of trust, and Jill senses it. She knows something is amiss, even though Barry can't even bring himself to say a word. And that's what our second passage is all about. Quote, "Though his demeanor didn't change, Jill had this sudden distinct impression that Barry was uncomfortable. He had turned away to study the copper diagram, but it almost seemed as if he were trying to avoid eye contact. Besides, he said, we know what we're up against now. As long as we use a little common sense, we'll be fine. Barry, are you okay? You seem tired." It wasn't the right word, but it was the only one that came to mind. He sighed, finally looking at her. He did seem tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his wide shoulders were slumped. "No, I'm all right. Just worried about Chris, you know?" Jill nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. Since he'd pulled her out of that trap, he'd been acting unusually subdued, even nervous. Paranoid much? Jill thought. This is Barry Burton you're talking about, the backbone of the Raccoon Stars, not to mention the man who just saved your life. What could he possibly be hiding? And that's the whole thing right there. You want to trust your friends. You want to trust your closest people in such dire situations. But what can you do when your gut feeling is just telling you all those signals, sending you all those signals, letting you know something is wrong? You have to listen to it. Because if you don't listen to it and act accordingly, the situation will only get worse. And that's exactly what ends up happening when Barry escorts Jill down into the basement floors of the mansion. And it is what our third section covers. Let's read it right now. Quote, "Barry couldn't bring himself to look at Jill as they took the elevator down to B4. Wesker would be waiting for them at the bottom, and Jill would find out that he had been helping the captain all along. He'd killed 3 more of the violent, springing creatures down in the tunnels before making it to the lab, only to run into Wesker, who had insisted that he lure Jill down to B4 and assist him in locking her up. The smiling bastard had reminded Barry of his family situation and promised again that it was the last thing he'd have to do. That after Jill was safely locked away, he'd call his people off. Except he'd said it every time. Find the crests and you're free. Help me in the tunnels, you're free. Betray your friend? Barry, are you okay?" He turned to her as the elevator stopped, looking miserably into her concerned, thoughtful eyes. "I've been worried about you ever since we got to the mansion," she said, laying a hand across his arm. "I even thought, well, never mind what I thought. Is something wrong?" He pulled the gate open and raised the mesh outer door, an excuse to look away. "Yeah, something's wrong," he said quietly. "But now's not the time. Let's just get this over with." Jill frowned, but nodded, still looking concerned. "Okay, when this is over, we can talk." "You won't want to talk to me when this is over," Barry thought to himself. Barry stepped out into the short hallway, and Jill followed, their boots clanking across a steel grate. The hall turned to the left just ahead, and Barry slowed down on the pretense of checking his weapon, letting Jill get in front of him. They turned the corner, and Jill froze, staring into the muzzle of Wesker's raised Beretta. He grinned at them, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, his smile smug and leering. "Hello, Jill. Nice of you to drop by," he said smoothly. "Nice work, Barry. Take her weapons." She turned her startled gaze to him as he quickly plucked the shotgun from her hands, then reached around to unholster her Beretta, his face burning. "Now get back up to B1 and wait for me by the exit. I'll be up in a few minutes." Barry stared at him. "But you said you just wanted to lock her up." Wesker shook his head. "Oh, don't worry. I'm not going to hurt her. I promise. Now get going." Jill looked at him, confused, and fear and anger playing across her face. "Barry?" "I'm sorry, Jill." And that's it. To really come back to our question of tonight's video, what do you do in your most harrowing night of your entire life, and you find that you can't even trust the closest people to you? At that point, you become your best friend. You become that person that you bounce every idea off of, and you have to stay as objective as possible, in my opinion, because that's the only way you're going to be able to listen to those gut feelings. Is something right, or is it completely off? Because if you don't listen to those gut feelings, like we said earlier, it's only going to get worse, and it does for Jill right there. It does for Jill, it does for Barry throughout the entire story. And what happens next, I'll leave it up to the viewer to find out on their own. But it's a very interesting story, very interesting back catalog of narratives that the Resident Evil universe provides. And even though these stories are such high concept, S.D. Perry still writes in a very human way. She puts us into those shoes of those main characters, and we just stay with them, every step of their journey. And we feel what they feel, especially in that situation where Jill becomes the target of the worst kind of blackmail. So that's just one aspect of the overall story, is that trust issue there between Jill and Barry. There are so many other side stories, and it is such a bigger novel than what I've covered here, but because of our time limit, really, and just the fact that I wanted to focus only on one theme, I chose that to be the theme. And I think that, again, S.D. Perry does a great job at turning something so horrific, such as survival horror, really, and making it as human as possible. So with all of that said, like if you felt something, comment if you wrote something, and I will see you next time at the Midnight Hour.